This module will help you have better mentoring conversations by approaching mentoring with an open and curious mindset. We're going to discuss the biggest barriers to having honest, open mentoring conversations, tools to overcome those barriers, and the role that psychological safety has to play. Let's jump straight in. The first barrier to great mentoring is having a fixed mindset. Some people have a fixed mindset, which means that they believe that their abilities are innate and cannot be changed much, if at all. Fixed mindsets feed off myths, like the myth that you are either born with talent or you are not, and that failure is a reflection of one's own intelligence or ability. Having a fixed mindset can lead to fear of failure, difficulty accepting challenges, or taking on feedback. Moving from a fixed mindset towards a growth mindset can be really helpful in mentoring for both mentors and mentees. The best learning and growth will happen if both parties are open to recognizing failure and mistakes and setting new goals and challenges. People with a growth mindset are more likely to seek out feedback and use it to improve their performance, whilst those with a fixed mindset may be more likely to ignore feedback or become defensive when receiving it, which can hinder a mentoring relationship. The second barrier to great mentoring is the advice trap. It's that knee-jerk reaction to tell people what to do, and it's usually counterproductive and can get in the way of finding real solutions. We're all guilty of wanting to share our words of wisdom. This usually comes from a well-meaning place with the intention of helping. As mentors, you may feel pressure to have all the answers and to provide as many suggestions and solutions as possible without really listening. But you don't need to have all the answers. Falling into the advice trap is really counterproductive. Giving unwanted advice gets in the way of finding real solutions. If we jump in with advice too soon, we run the risk of advising someone on the wrong thing because we haven't taken the time to listen to what they're really concerned about. There are a few tips to avoid the advice trap. The first is open and active listening. If you're waiting for an opportunity to talk, you're doing it wrong. So simply talk a bit less and pay attention to what the other person is saying. Lean into a pause and take the opportunity to reflect on your mentor or mentee's response. Remember, you don't have to respond right away. If you find it hard, approach it as a development opportunity for yourself. Active listening is a skill that will serve you in all of your relationships. You can also summarize what you've understood as a way of clarifying. This can sound like, if I'm understanding you correctly. Hearing what you've understood in your own words can also help the other person to reframe their own understanding of their situation too. Another way of avoiding the advice trap is asking great questions. Asking strategic questions will facilitate long-lasting learning and empower your mentee to feel like they're in control of their own journey. Here we have some examples of great questions to ask your mentee and to get them talking. My personal favourite is the one best question, and what else? People almost always have more to say, and sometimes it's the second or third response that produces the real answer. The third barrier to great mentoring conversations is a lack of psychological safety. What is psychological safety? A belief that it's okay to take interpersonal risk, to express ideas and concerns, to speak up with questions, and to admit mistakes without fear of negative consequences. It's super important to develop psychological safety in mentoring, because without it, you won't feel comfortable getting real with each other and taking the conversation to a deeper, more meaningful level. So how can we create psychological safety in mentoring? It's all about creating a safe space for open and honest communication. You can do that by establishing clear expectations for your mentoring engagement, which we'll be covering in upcoming modules. Knowing what to expect from each other leads to a relationship of trust and respect. You may also want to consider the time and place of your meetings. Maybe it's difficult for your mentee to speak openly when they're at home with their family in the evenings, or when they're in the office surrounded by co-workers. So ask your mentee what's best for them. Being open and vulnerable with your mentee or mentor will help them to be open and vulnerable with you in return. And finally, asking for feedback can open the door for more honest communication between you both. The fourth and final barrier to great mentoring conversations is a lack of self-awareness. The best mentors and mentees are aware of their strengths and weaknesses, as well as their own prejudice and bias. Without that self-awareness, it's hard to see situations objectively and to help the other person through their own development. It's also helpful for mentors to role model self-awareness to their mentees. Unfortunately, self-awareness doesn't just develop by reading a book or attending a workshop. It's a long process of working on yourself and understanding how you function and how it affects the world around you. But many of the tips we've covered in this module will help you to become more self-aware, like asking your mentee or your mentor for feedback, developing a growth mindset, and being open with your partner. This module has covered the 4 biggest barriers to effective mentoring conversations: having a fixed mindset, falling into the advice trap, a lack of psychological safety, and a lack of self-awareness. We encourage you to pause here and ask yourself, which of these 4 barriers are you most likely to struggle with? We also looked at tips to overcome those barriers. A few of the key takeaways that you can put into action right away are listening more and talking less, asking great questions, and role modeling openness and vulnerability.